Good afternoon. I'm East Hampton Town Supervisor Peter Van Scoyoc, and I'm joined today by Julie Tighe from the New York League of Conservation Voters. She's the president, and Adrienne Esposito for the Citizens Campaign for the Environment, and she's the executive director of that organization. Both of your organizations are astutely involved with many of the environmental issues that we face in East Hampton and throughout Long Island. So today we're here to talk about the upcoming state bond referendum, Proposition 1 on the ballot. So when you go to vote, flip over the ballot, you'll find the ballot propositions. Additionally, we have a local ballot proposition, Proposition 3, which is on community housing. So educate yourself about the ballot propositions, and that's what we're here to do today, is to talk a little bit more about the state ballot referendum.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for having us on. And it is a $4.2 billion Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. Very broadly, it's going to provide funding for drinking water and water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure. It's going to provide funding for us to protect more open space and invest in our parks. It's going to provide over $1 billion for climate change mitigation, including funding for electric school buses and making our public buildings and schools more energy efficient and shifting them to renewable energy. And there's going to be over $1 billion for climate resiliency, protecting our communities from storms and flooding like we've seen with Superstorm Sandy, as well as making sure that our communities are able to address urban heat island, which is more of an issue in cities. But certainly between those two, we know there's a lot of investments that are needed for us to tackle climate change.
Well, one thing we know that Long Islanders can agree on is clean water. And we've worked really hard over the last several decades to attain that goal. And the good news is things are getting better. But we have a long way to go. So this bond act, the Clean Water, Clean Air, Green Jobs Bond Act, Prop 1 on the ballot, will allocate more funding, $650 million for sewer infrastructure, replacement grants for septics to the new IAs, also for filtering our drinking water, something that's becoming very costly as we have more and more of the drinking water standards for these new emerging toxic chemicals. We need to filter. But we want to keep drinking water affordable as well as clean. So this will provide grants to do that. And honestly, in the town of East Hampton, we're very fragile and vulnerable here to sea level rise and to the impacts of climate change. So the $1.1 billion in this bond act for coastal resiliency is pretty key to the sustainability and the longevity, of our beautiful community here in East Hampton town.
Right, so as you and Julie have sort of sketched out what these funds can be used for, I thinking as a supervisor, have a whole list of projects that we have
It's a good way to
underway
be thinking.
and initiatives, and centering around protecting our environment, addressing water quality issues, resiliency, sustainability, renewable energy, and we've pushed forward on every single one of those topics, and have made significant inroads to addressing that. Here we are additionally blessed that we have a community preservation fund from a transfer tax that provides us with millions of dollars of water quality funds for septic upgrades and rebates for individual homeowners and businesses. And at the same time, there are certain projects that are beyond municipal funding. The revenues that we get from property taxes simply won't cover some major ticket items. For instance, back in the 70s, the town, through federal grant funding, at I think over 80% federal grant funding, was able to build a scavenger waste treatment plant to treat waste here in town. That building and facility aged out. It was no longer sustainable. We closed it, demolished the building, and repurposed that. Actually, the East Hampton schools purchased that as a bus barn and depot area from us. But we know that we need, for downtown Montauk, community waste treatment. And that's a big ticket item. That could easily be $65 million or more, and it's not something that taxpayers can bear in the local municipality. But we sorely need it because there's currently, an antiquated system of dealing with our waste. We essentially put it in the hole in the ground. And when it gets full, we pump it out and take it to Bergen
Not
Point.
exactly a 21st century technology.
Not exactly. In fact, in some ways, I think the Romans, had the same technology at the time. So, this bond referendum could make available to municipalities like East Hampton funds for critical infrastructure, for treating wastewater, for making adjustments to sea level rise. We've just adopted our coastal assessment and resiliency plan into our comp plan, and that highlights a myriad of projects that we need to undertake to either move out of harm's way critical infrastructure, fortify some critical infrastructure, create living shorelines, and all sorts of other environmental efforts. And again, having a source of revenue to be able to move these projects forward is imperative.
So it's really, you're bringing up so many different kinds of projects that the Bond Act will help with. I think what's really important is sort of what you talked about with the partnership of needing some funding from the federal government and the local governments. So now we have an infrastructure law that passed Congress in 2021 that will make funds available to the states to provide to local governments for investing in exactly the kinds of projects you're talking about, for wastewater infrastructure upgrades, for making our communities more resilient from storms. And this Bond Act will be able to help us draw down even more dollars and make your local tax dollars go much further, because you'll be able to do more projects using those state and federal dollars all together to create sort of a complete package of funding that will be available to do more projects to protect our communities. So that's one of the really big benefits of this, is reducing the burden on local taxpayers by making more money available from the state and in enabling us to have that skin in the game that the federal government requires to support those federal grants.
And I think what's interesting about this is, believe it or not, better water quality in our bays makes us stronger against storms. And the reason I say that is it will make our wetlands stronger. So the less nitrogen we're putting into our bays, the deeper the roots of the wetlands, the more they are able to buffer the mainland against waves, storms, wind, sea level rise, and it actually is all connected. So honestly, the South Fork of Long Island, actually the whole South Shore of Long Island, is uniquely vulnerable throughout New York State. And so much about this Bond Act is really for us, that because we are in such a increased vulnerability, we could benefit from the funding that's offered and then benefit again by the matching federal dollars. But the federal government wants to see a local match. The Bond Act could be that local match, bringing more federal dollars into East Hampton and the South Shore of Long Island to protect us in the way we need to be protected. I mean, honestly, right, it's no joke, right? These storms, they're going to happen. Sea level rise is happening. We need to prepare. Albert Einstein, was famous for saying, intelligent people solve problems, but brilliant people prevent them. So we don't want to just solve the problem. We want to prevent the flooding. And the way we do that is with good planning and a lot of funding.
Yeah, and again, that points out an example here locally where we have applied for grant funding for our coastal assessment and resiliency planning efforts to start implementing that plan. And again, having grants that can be used to leverage in order for us to hire additional staff to deal with issues, to actually have, the physical construction of various things is so vitally important. And, we need to keep pushing that effort forward on all fronts to make sure that our residents are safe, that there's a way to have a sustainable future, to protect our environment. And out here, as you know, both know, the environment really drives our whole economy.
That's right.
So, we benefit from having set aside large areas of the town in natural states and protecting them. That's improved our water quality. That makes this a much more desirable area to come to, and that drives our economy. So, it's an investment in our future for sure. And money well spent, in my opinion.
And that's one of the categories of funds that will be available to local governments and to not-for-profits is open space protection, right? We know that it helps protect drinking water. We know that it provides access for people to open space. It's better for our health to do that. And I know here on Long Island, there's a lot of opportunities still to preserve more land for public access. And I know Adrienne has some numbers on that front.
Well, there's that 30,000 acres of open space still in Suffolk County that could be preserved instead of, developed. And I think one of the things, again, the vast majority of the public on Long Island agree on, particularly out east, is that we could easily become overdeveloped, or if we haven't already. And to preserve the land is really to preserve our heritage. There's funding for small family farms, a very important thing in this Bond Act. So preserving farmland, preserving open space, preserving water quality, really, I think, preserves who we are. And it also preserves our maritime culture. I think all Long Island, we live here because we get to live by the water, right? We love it. I grew up with, one fishing pole in one hand and a crab trap in the other hand, and 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on the land. And I think that's an experience that many of us want to pass down to our children. It's why, we don't live here for the taxes. God knows we don't live here for the traffic. But we live by the water. And we have to be good stewards, and the Bond Act and voting yes is one way to be a good steward of this place that we love.
So one of the allowable uses enumerated in the bond, it specifically talked about electric school buses.
It's Julie's favorite topic.
It is
Is it
one of my
really?
favorite topics.
The electric school bus?
Yes. We've been advocating at the league for electrification of the school buses around the state for a number of years. The state budget includes a requirement for all school buses to be electric by 2035, and they're making a major investment as part of the Bond Act to help school districts to transition there. That's also going to help us draw down those federal infrastructure dollars, because the federal government provided $2.5 billion for electric school buses across the country, but the state of New York is putting down hundreds of millions of dollars as well to help school districts make that transition sooner rather than later. So that is something that's really exciting. We know that the school bus depots are very often in communities of color and disadvantaged communities, low-income communities. So transitioning those school buses sooner rather than later will protect not just the children who are riding the buses every day to and from school, which is, of course, our top priority, but also to everyone who lives in the communities around those school bus depots. And we already know that some of the school districts or school bus companies are making that transition here. I know Suffolk Transportation, for example, has already purchased some electric school buses, drawing down some federal grants that were early, so that we can start making that move now rather than later.
So I know one of the issues with electric vehicles, initially had been range of vehicle, how far can it go on a charge? And while in some cases they're not as practical for people driving long distances, doing that bus route on a daily basis, you're not talking about hundreds of miles, usually, at least in our town.
Right.
And,
I will tell you, I drove my electric car all the way to Buffalo when I missed a flight recently, but I also drove it all the way up to Montreal and back.
yeah, so I know that
There's a lot
that
to
the
go on that
range,
front.
the range has definitely been improving.
Yeah.
I mean, I know council member Kate Rogers just got a new electric car. It's not her first, but her more recent one has a 280-mile range.
Yep.
I mean, that's virtually
Kate.
comparable.
Mine is, my range is about 310
Mm-hmm.
with my new electric car. I got one earlier this year. It's coming a long way, but you're right on
It
school
is.
buses. Their routes are much shorter.
Right.
They have different needs. It's obviously a little bit heavier of a load than, my personal vehicle is. But it is, I think, we've seen studies that show that the air quality inside of those buses can be worse than the air quality outside of it. And those are our children who have the most vulnerabilities. And asthma is the leading cause of school absenteeism in the state of New York. So
Yeah, I
this
don't
is a
think
good
a lot of
opportunity.
people realize that there's
No, the
that
connection.
effect on riders of school buses currently that are burning fossil fuels that are either, gas or diesel powered.
Right.
Buses. Not to mention they're probably a little quieter, but, there's again, that resilience factor, the fact that we have a renewable source of energy, either through solar or wind energy, that can be converted to electricity, It's not just, as you mentioned, asthma is an issue, but there's so many other health issues as well from air pollution that come from emissions from vehicles. So again, that's an effort, I think really helps secure our future, the future of a cleaner, greener planet. These are things we can do. We have the technology. We should move forward. The fossil fuel burning age is really the remnants of the dinosaurs, if you will.
It's
And
very true.
The technology has really expanded, to the point where it's probably about as efficient as it can get with burning fossil fuels, but, it still has that negative, dirty component of emissions that
And
you can't get around.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. One of the purposes of this bond act is to also help us transition into 21st century technology. We still use, actually, in Suffolk County, no technology to treat wastewater. We are known, unfortunately, as the septic tank capital of the globe, and we don't want that claim to fame. We are still using diesel for, bus transportation. So we have a lot to catch up on, and we know that we can do it. We have the technology and the wherewithal, but we just need the funding. And that's, I think, one of the bases of this. This will allocate the funding over the next several years to make these transitions. In New York City, they still have infrastructure pipes, water infrastructure pipes made of clay in some cases, or wood in other cases.
Right.
I've been reading stories. So, pipes are out of sight, out of mind until they break. But then when they break, we need the funding to replace them, upgrade them, and make them more efficient.
In too many parts of this state, our water infrastructure is over 100 years old.
Yep.
Right, we're an old state, we have old infrastructure, and to Adrienne's point, right, they're buried, people don't think about it as much. So this is certainly an opportunity to do that. There are also a number of places where they still have lead pipes in their drinking water, right? And it's very often, it's not the water pipes that the municipality provides, but those pipes that go from the water main to your home, that generally speaking are the responsibility of the homeowner. So there's funding in here that will, again, I'm going to keep saying it over again, there's money from the infrastructure bill for replacing lead pipes, and this will allow us to do that much more with those dollars to get rid of those lead pipes, which everyone knows are contributing to health issues, in particular for young people.
And I think it's worth noting, it's not only going to make us healthier and safer, but the studies show that 100,000 new jobs will be created. We're calling them green jobs because they'll be in an infrastructure sector or energy sector. And so it is something that's going to create more places of employment, but with today's technology. So again, helping us transition from the past to the current. And so it's 100,000 green jobs in addition to all the other things we talked about.
And those are going to be high-paying jobs. Those are going to be union jobs for the most part, but the law requires prevailing wages to be paid for projects supported with the Bond Act. So they're going to be supporting, family-sustaining wages associated with that.
Right, so part of a transition, you need the infrastructure to help facilitate that. So for electric vehicles, having, charging stations available in a community commensurate with the number of people who need to charge is really important. And, so the town has undertaken that effort, and, we've been expanding our infrastructure for charging fast chargers throughout town at various locations. But then again, here we have the opportunity to fast track that, to give more funding, to leverage that funding towards, creating these opportunities for workers, and also help, transition to these new clean technologies. And, so again, I think this is really what we need to do. It's a major investment, but it's a needed major investment in our future.
That's right. We haven't had a bond act for the environment in the state of New York since 1996. So it's been a very long time since the voters got to say to the state, yes, this is what we want you to do with our tax dollars. And I think, one of the questions we get is, what is this going to do to our taxes? There's no new taxes associated with this bond act. It was negotiated as part of the state's budget, and it's included in the financial plan. So this is not going to result in increased taxes, because we know that's a concern that people have. This, again, is a good investment in our state's infrastructure that our local governments will be able to draw down federal dollars and do even more work with. I know I sound like a little bit of a broken record on that front.
Well, I think that's a
but
really
it's important.
It's an important point to make because especially now with inflation the way it is and interest rates are rising, people are, becoming more and more budget conscious. And, they don't want to see additional tax burdens placed on them. And actually, this bond act in many ways will help alleviate those tax burdens that we would have to impose as a local municipality in order to put in necessary infrastructure and improvements.
This is going to save
So
people money.
This is going to save people tax dollars
100%.
ultimately.
We like to say this is not an expenditure of funds, but rather this is an investment of funds, where we will see a return on our dollars. Not only a return in the way of maintaining a high quality of life, cleaner water, which means better health, and also the local economy and job creation. And, I'll just be very candid with you. What I tell people, it's expensive? Battling cancer, that's expensive. And healthcare bills, that's expensive. And, the chemicals we're finding in our drinking water that now we need to filter out are very serious. The PFAS chemicals measured in the parts per trillion, because they are so highly toxic to the liver, to the kidney, and I could go on, but to the immune system. We need to filter. And we need some help with the funding those filtration devices, because they're not cheap. In fact, it's about $1 million per wellhead. I just left a meeting in another town, I won't say which one it is, and they just had to allocate $3 million for one wellhead for all the technology they needed to filter out 1,4-dioxane and PFAS. So as these costs increase, we need to come up with a way to pay for it, because we deserve both clean water and affordable water. And this is one way to achieve that goal.
Well, the other thing that's also expensive is reacting to something after it's happened, like a
Yes.
storm, rather than taking preventative measures. And one of the items that's included in the resiliency pot, the storm, preparedness pots, let's call it, is the opportunity for doing some buyouts of homes or for doing some elevations of homes in places that are subject to flooding on a regular
You know
basis.
something about
or
that,
risk.
Supervisor.
Right, but oftentimes, the way we've been doing it up until now is the federal government through FEMA will provide funding after your home has been devastated,
Right.
after you've lost your wedding pictures and your kids' toys and all these other things, and you've gone through a horrible circumstance. Now this is an opportunity for the first time in the state of New York to do some of those things proactively and say, voluntarily, of course, for people to say, we're sick of being at risk of flooding, let me take a buyout. We can repurpose this land for protecting the community from flooding, and they get some funds to compensate them for that, or elevate their homes or otherwise protect themselves. So this is a huge opportunity to do that proactively instead of reacting, because we know that for every dollar we spend on proactive actions, it saves us $6 on the back end, because it costs a lot more money, as we know from the devastation of Superstorm Sandy, after the fact than before.
So I'm very fortunate to be the supervisor of a town where the residents are keenly aware of the importance of the environment to the economy, to their own health and enjoyment. So in many ways, I think people will be accepting and supportive of this measure. We talked about, the specter of increased taxes, and that this actually isn't going to have that impact the way it's designed. So people aren't going to feel that in their budgets paying additional taxes. In fact, they'll, in some cases, will offset future costs that they would be taxed on because of this money's available. What other kinds of things are you hearing? Are you hearing any other pushback or reluctance, resistance to the Bond Act at all, other than, is it going to cost me more money?
There is no organized opposition. We are working together with a number of other organizations, from the AFL-CIO to the Long Island Contractors Association, obviously groups like Citizens Campaign for the Environment and the League of Conservation Voters, the Autobahn, the Nature Conservancy. There's so much broad support from local governments, from the labor unions, from the business community, and we're very delighted about that. We're not surprised. right? Clean water in particular, as Adrienne has been focusing on, here on Long Island, right? We just did, you just had some polling done, and that was one of the top issues that came out.
One of the top
Right.
5 issues that
Right.
everyone agrees on.
And it
That's
really
right.
should be the top issue from my standpoint.
I couldn't agree
because-
more.
Right.
Because we live on our sole source aquifer.
Yeah.
The water we drink is in the ground underneath the land that we live on. And so we have to be really careful about what we do on the land and how we protect that vital resource. I mean, imagine how expensive it would be if we had to bring water in from elsewhere.
No, we're not even going to go there, Supervisor.
No, I think it's important
No.
for people to just understand.
100%.
You know,
I mean-
so that we really protect it.
And we've looked at, had some companies trundle through our office and, ask gently, what would you think if we had desalinization or this or that? And they come up with these plans, but none of them are good plans. The
they're
best
very
plan,
expensive
they're
plans.
very
Very
expensive.
expensive.
I mean, that's the whole thing. We want clean water, but also affordable.
Right.
But the only way for Long Island to achieve that is to protect the aquifer that we already have.
That's right.
That's the way we're going to get clean, affordable water. Like you said, not from a desal plant, which is unbelievably energy intensive, which means very costly, or not from shipping it in from New York City. That's not going to work. We have to maintain what we have.
So you've been busy trying to educate the public about this proposition. A lot of people don't even know that this
Yes.
is coming up. And, even, those who would vote regularly may find out at the last minute, what's this proposition? And I know I mentioned this before we started taping, that the ballot language is very clear and understandable, which is always a plus. Sometimes, we see ballot propositions that have double negatives, and you're trying to figure out which way this
It's
is
so
going.
true.
Do I really want to vote yes or no? What does this really mean? So the clear, concise language is definitely a plus. And as you say, most people understand the value of clean water.
I think that's why it's very important that the name of the ballot measure itself, which will be included in Proposition 1, is the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. Everyone knows what clean air is and they want to drink it. Everyone knows what clean water is and they
Breathe it.
want to breathe it, right? And
Vice
green
versa.
jobs are
Vice versa.
evolving, but everybody likes jobs, right? So it's very exciting that the state government has actually put something forward that the regular people can understand. So make sure you flip your ballot over.
I was just going to say.
And read Proposition 1, and we hope that you vote for it.
And I'm also going to put in a plug for Proposition 3, which is a local proposition to create a 0.5% transfer tax paid for by the purchasers of real estate, much like the CPF fund operates now, which will give local towns, the 5 East and actually it's only 4 of the East End towns are participating, Riverhead's out. But that's critically important right now for East Hampton voters to understand what that ballot measure means. And while I can't say vote yes for it or no for it, it's important for people to understand how this will impact the housing crisis here in East Hampton. So that's also on the ballot. So a very important ballot this year in terms of propositions for local voters.
Well, I just want to say, we're counting on you, East Hampton. We don't want to see this pass by a little bit. We'd love to see East Hampton come out really big for clean water, as you have in the past. We've had past clean water initiatives in East Hampton passed with over 70% of the vote, and we'd like to be consistent this year as well.
So the last opportunity that there was a ballot measure for clean water, really, for local residents to weigh in on was the allocation of 20% of the CPF
Yes.
funds for water quality. And I'm very proud to say that in East Hampton, it passed by over 80%.
That's great.
And it was an
Affirmative.
extremely wise decision. I mean, look at all the good it has done. So it was a very valuable vote, and it resulted in exactly what people wanted and needed, you allocating some of that fund for all of the clean water projects that you've been doing. So it was really, really very wise.
So we're excited. Early voting starts on October 29th, and it runs through November 6th. And then, of course, Election Day is on November 8th. So just want to say it one more time. Flip the ballot over. Look for Proposition 1, the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act.
Well, I'm so happy to have you here in ELF TV studios talking to East Hampton residents about this really critical measure that's on the ballot. Julie Tighe, again, New York League of Conservation Voters President, Executive Director of the Citizens for the Environment, Adrienne Esposito. Pleasure to see you both again.
Thank you,
We
Supervisor.
appreciate all
Thank
that
you.
you're doing to keep Long Island clean and safe and ensure a better future for all of us.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
having us
much.
on.
Stay safe and be well, everyone.